Hi, this is Ophoria, the digital reader, and this is my book life for the month of May. Today I'm going over all the books I bought and everything I read this month. I picked up a bunch of books in May and it made me realize something. I've been going hard on BookBub lately. Now I still love BookBub, and if I see a book at a great price that's in my wheelhouse, I'm going to go pick it up. But because I've been so focused on those deals, I've really been neglecting my actual wish list, the specific books I told myself I wanted to buy. So going forward, I'm definitely going to scale back on BookBub and reintroduce a strict monthly budget. I want to use that budget to intentionally chip away at the books on my wish list. If I'm lucky enough to clear that list out entirely, then I'll lean back into BookBub until the wish list grows again. Also, and I'll probably do a deeper dive on this in other videos. Even though I'm the digital reader, or at least that's the name of my channel, I think I'm going to start branching out a little bit. I'm planning to start talking about music on the channel. Back in the day, I was a massive music lover and a total audiophile. As I've gotten older, my hearing isn't quite what it used to be, so my focus has shifted. I'm no longer chasing absolute peak audio quality because honestly, my ears won't catch the difference anymore. But I still deeply enjoy music and love collecting music-centric things. Just like with my books, I prefer to digitally own my music. I don't use streaming services for my daily listening. The only exception is when I use them to check out contemporary tracks to see what's new and if there's anything interesting out there I might like. If there is, then what I do is I stream the album, and if I really like it, then I'll go out and buy it rather than continuing to stream it. But anyway, those are videos for another time. Right now, let's dive into the books I picked up in the month of May. So the first thing I'm doing to tackle my wish list is getting back to buying Shadowrun books. Shadowrun is my absolute favorite urban fantasy series, and I've been reading it easily for a decade and a half, if not longer. There are a ton of books in this universe, but my goal is like Pokemon. I gotta catch them all. So I'm picking up these books because they're Shadowrun regardless of the plot. I'm going to go over 4 books I got this month a little slower than usual. Just pause the video if you want to check out the blurb or synopsis, the price, where I got them from, or whether they're DRM free. So the first book that I got is Bad Faith by Jason M. Hardy. The next book I got is Back of Beyond by Marie Bilodeau. The next book I got is Wasted by Marie Bilodeau. And then the last Shadowrun book I bought this month is Corporate Business by Dylan Birtolo. Those are the 4 Shadowrun fiction titles I added to the shelf this month. Next up is The Force of Silence by Emily Rodda. This is the first book in the Deltora Quest series. Now I love fantasy, but I had never heard of this series until I watched a European YouTuber talking about their love for it and sharing their incredibly fond nostalgic memories. It's an Australian fantasy series that gives off a distinct Lord of the Rings or the Chronicles of Narnia vibe. I wanted to read this first installment to see what all the hype, or at least the nostalgia, was about, so I picked it up. Next, I picked up Adventures of a Dwergish Girl. When I first started this channel, I was pretty hardcore into sci-fi, fantasy, and superhero fiction. But through reading for the channel, I've discovered 2 subgenres I've really grown to love: historical fiction and adult fairy tale style books. Adventures of a Dwergish Girl by Daniel Pinkwater jumped out at me for 2 reasons. First, it's one of the DRM-free books I spotted on Tachyon Publications, one of the indie publishers I showcased in my DRM-free publisher series, which I've linked in the playlist above. Second, reading the blurb, it just had this really cool, distinct fairy tale kind of vibe that got me curious to see where the story goes. I was a huge fan of the Miss Fisher's Murder Mysteries TV show. Because I love the series so much, I decided to try the source material, and I really enjoyed the books too. Now, whenever I see a Miss Fisher novel by Kerry Greenwood deeply discounted on BookBub, it's an automatic buy for my collection. As soon as I saw Away with the Fairies, I knew I had to grab it. Reading the synopsis for King Rat by China Miéville gave me a real historical fiction Phantom of the Opera meets Quasimodo type of vibe. It reminded me of a book I really enjoyed called The Bells, which was set in a historical European era. The Bells wasn't fantasy or mythology or anything, but it made me want to revisit that old world medieval type setting. King Rat looks fascinating because while I enjoy historical fiction, I don't read a ton of it mixed with dark fantasy. And it was cheap on BookBub, so I pulled the trigger. Not a lot of explanation needed for this one. The Heat Song by Chester Himes was the single book from the Harlem Detective series that I was missing. It was sitting on my wish list, and since I'm cleaning things up, I went ahead and completed the set, so now I have all 6 of the Harlem Detective series by Chester Himes. I really love the D-list supervillain book Confessions of a D-list Supervillain by Jim Bernheimer. I had previously put the 3rd book, Origins of a D-list Supervillain, and the 4th book, Rise of a D-list Supervillain, on my wish list. True to my goal of clearing out that list, I went ahead and grabbed book 3. This is a classic example of a book catching my eye purely from the title. I read the blurb for The Fish and Chip Shop Detectives by Jenny Kane, and it just sounded fun and cute. I've really been enjoying modern detective stories lately. While there are a couple of classic mysteries I love, I really vibe with the modern accidental detectives who have regular jobs and just happen to get pulled into a mystery. It looked interesting, it was cheap, so thank you, BookBub. And now for the books that I read in the month of May. Mission Improbable by J.J. Green is a story about a young woman who unwittingly becomes a galactic diplomatic operative. Stylistically, it aims for that tongue-in-cheek satirical energy popularized by icons like Douglas Adams or Terry Pratchett. But for me, this was a bizarre reading experience because the book itself is well written, the prose is solid, the craft is there, which makes the narrative such a disappointment. To put it bluntly, the plot is an absolute dumpster fire. The author introduces wacky concepts with zero explanation and no internal logic. We're talking about aliens shaped like office supplies and creatures that taste like custard just because. There's no world building to back it up, it's just what you get. It feels like the 20th installment of a franchise that has completely run out of ideas and is banking on the hope that the audience will just read anything you put in front of them. If the author had put any real effort into making a cohesive story out of these absurdities, I might have enjoyed it. Instead, it feels almost cynical. Usually when I give a book 2 stars, it's because the writing is poor. Here, the writing is fine, but the plot is such nonsense that I couldn't recommend it to anyone without feeling embarrassed. Trying to explain the premise makes me sound like I've lost my mind. I'm giving this series a pass. It's a well-written book with a bottom-tier plot, and there are just simply better things to read, so I'm giving this 2 stars. I rarely read contemporary novels, nor do I read much of what I call die-hard fiction. To me, die-hard fiction usually features a protagonist in law enforcement or the military. They possess a specialized skill set, find themselves in dangerous situations, and must use their wits and specialized training to escape. I'm talking about characters like Jack Reacher, Jack Ryan, Remo Williams, and the books like The Bourne Identity. I certainly enjoy watching the film and television adaptations of these stories, but when I tried to read the actual novel The Bourne Identity by Robert Ludlum, it just didn't capture my interest. It felt much slower and more tedious than the film. So when I picked up The Rescue by Stephen Konkoly, I fully expected to get bored early on. To be fair, a lot of that is just my personal taste. It's not that I find real life boring, but rather that books grounded in current affairs and contemporary themes simply just don't excite me the way new worlds, alien races, unique cultures, and superpowers do. Because of this, I didn't expect to personally enjoy the book. However, I was pleasantly surprised. I actually liked the novel and its protagonist, Ryan Decker. While he was not an incredibly deep character, he also was not such a generic action figure that he immediately turned me off, and I genuinely enjoyed the plot. I have to admit, I'm quite surprised by how much I liked it. Generally, when I rate a book 3 stars, it means the story was decent, but I have no burning desire to continue with the series. At the end of this book, which is the first installment in a series, I found myself really appreciating the setup. I absolutely want to read more about Ryan Decker and follow his future adventures. Because I genuinely enjoyed this book and want to read the sequels, I'm definitely giving it 4 stars. To be clear, I would not call this novel groundbreaking or remarkably original. It is simply good, solid action fiction. However, it was delivered at a great pace with characters that kept me engaged, and I also felt that the decisions Ryan Decker made felt realistic for his situation rather than leave me thinking no one would ever do that. I'm happy with my 4-star rating, and I will definitely check to see if the second book in the series is available so I can add it to my reading list. Tusk Love by Thea Guanzon is technically the first traditional romance novel I've ever read. While I've read The Song of Achilles, I view that more as historical fiction with a love story. It lacks the typical hallmarks of romance fiction. Tusk Love, on the other hand, has them all. The steamy, graphic, but not pornographic scenes, the characters constantly mooning over each other's incredible attractiveness, that highlighted a major difference for me between romance and other genres. Romance has a vested interest in making the leads highly desirable to the reader. In fantasy or sci-fi or other genres, characters can be flawed, unappealing, and downright unlikable as long as the plot hooks you. In romance, you kind of have to root for the main protagonist, and you have to kind of be attracted to the main protagonist. As a massive fan of cozy fantasy, I absolutely loved the world, the story, and the way the main characters grew close. But when it came to the actual romance scenes and the heavy mooning I just felt it was over the top for me. Whenever the text started describing someone as moist or hard, I cringed and just forced my way through it until everyone was dry and soft again. Those parts just weren't for me. It does feel a bit contradictory because it's like saying, I love the Bourne Identity except for the spy and the action scenes. You probably would tell that person, well, it doesn't sound like you love the Bourne Identity, but I did like this book. I liked like 75% of this book. But I've realized I just prefer my romance with zero spice. Give me a sweet kiss, a fade to black cutscene, and the characters waking up happy the next morning. For my personal reading enjoyment, this was a 3-star book because the spice dragged it down for me, and the mooning. However, I'm giving it an official 4-star rating. Why? Because I feel it's a high quality book that I would highly recommend to anyone who loves romantasy or wants to try the romance genre. My personal grievances are probably just because I'm old, jaded, and a little bit dead inside. I have to add an extra star for the readers who aren't. Ultimately, I'm glad this was my first romance book. It taught me what I like, and I'm actually looking forward to diving into more romance books to see how different authors handle spice, pining, and pacing. I have a strange relationship with Kurt Vonnegut. I was so deeply affected by his first short story of his I read, Harrison Bergeron, that I wanted to dive into all his work. So far, though, the first 2 books I've read have been a mixed bag. His debut novel, Player Piano, was okay, but more grounded in reality. In total, I've read 1 short story and 2 novels, and all of those have been set in a dystopian future so far. It'll be interesting to see how his style evolves, as I know he later wrote books with more contemporary settings. His second novel, The Sirens of Titan, was a strange experience. Evaluated strictly on plot, character development, and cohesiveness, it's a 2-star book. The plot was scattered, the characters weren't compelling, but at a certain point, I stopped expecting a logical narrative and began viewing it as a collection of snippets of humanity, almost like a book of poems. One of the infuriating things about Vonnegut here is how all over the place he is. Yet despite the chaotic struggles, I'm definitely going to keep reading him. Some of his prose offers incredible poetic, prophetic insights into modern humanity. He perfectly captures 21st century people navigating technology alongside the unique ennui of having everything. Here's an example of his prose when it really hits. Once upon a time on Tralfamadore, there were creatures who weren't anything like machines. They weren't dependable, they weren't efficient, they weren't predictable, and they weren't durable. These poor creatures were obsessed by the idea that everything that existed had to have a purpose, and that these purposes were higher than others. These creatures spent most of their time trying to find out what their purpose was, and every time they found out what seemed to be a purpose of themselves, the purpose seemed so low that the creatures were filled with disgust and shame. And rather than serve such a low purpose, the creatures made a machine to serve it. This left the creatures free to serve higher purposes, but whenever they found a higher purpose, the purpose still wasn't high enough. So the machines were made to serve higher purposes too. And the machines did everything so expertly that they were finally given the job of finding out what the highest purpose of the creatures could be. And the machines reported, in all honesty, that the creatures couldn't really be said to have any purpose at all. The creatures thereupon began slaying each other because they hated purposeless things above all else. And they discovered that they weren't even good at slaying. So they turned their job over to the machines too, and the machines finished up the job in less time than you can say Tralfamador. So that's an example for me of when I read something and I was just like, that's pretty good. That's pretty prophetic. And when you think about us today in AI, you definitely have to ask yourself, how prophetic is what this guy just wrote? So some passages to me are easily 5-star material. It makes the book tough to rate. As a narrative driving a story forward, it's a 2. But as a collective of deeply insightful prose, every now and then, it's a 5. Ultimately, I settled on 4 stars. I wouldn't recommend it for the plot, but the writing is so incredible that I just want to hand it to someone just to see how it affects them. It's funny, I'm giving this book 4 stars, but when I look back on what I wrote about this book, my thoughts are a bit like a Vonnegut book. They're kind of all over the place, but hopefully you can pluck something useful out of them. So I guess it's time to wrap up everything that I got and everything that I read in the month of May. So first, the books that I got. I got Bad Faith by Jason M. Hardy. I got Back of Beyond by Marie Bilodeau. I got Wasted by Marie Bilodeau. I got Corporate Fiction by Dylan Birtolo. I got The Force of Silence by Emily Rodda. I got Adventures of a Dwergish Girl by Daniel Pinkwater. I got Away with the Fairies by Kerry Greenwood. I got King Rat by China Miéville. I got The Heat's On by Chester Himes. I got Secrets of a D-List Supervillain by Jim Bernheimer. I got The Fish and Chip Shop Detectives by Jenny Kane. And then what I read this month. I read Mission Improbable by J.J. Green. I read The Rescue by Stephen Konkoly. I read Sirens of Titan by Kurt Vonnegut. And I read Tusk Love by Thea Guanzon. So there you go. That's my book life for May. This is Zophori, the digital reader, and keep reading, y'all.